right, welcome to a special edition of Video Games Real Talk. Alexander is busy traveling the world, going to shows and everything. This week has been really packed, so we are going to be speaking on his behalf. I have with me Richard and Yaji, two general managers from all of our brands, and we are going to be talking about the amazing topic of the metaverse. What is the metaverse? How do we see it? How do the people that talk to us see it? And really, where's the industry going with this term? And what is going to be sort of the future of what that means for the industry? So I will hand it over to Richard and Yaji to quickly introduce themselves and kind of give a heads up where they are currently with the metaverse, and then we're going to be taking it from there.
All right. Thanks, Stefan. So as Stefan said, my name is Richard. I'm the general manager of 3 of the brands here at Streamline. And across the brands, we look at a lot of how game technology is moving towards more mainstream uses in entertainment and media. So this ranges from things like creating real-time art assets to be used on a cloud-streamed fashion show to interactive game streams where viewers are not just commenting on the stream but actually influencing the games itself. So yeah, that's me.
Hi everyone, I'm Yaji, General Manager of All Pixels brand and Day Zero brand. All Pixels focus on 3D art production for video games, and Day Zero provides localization and QA support. Both brands are rooted in video games, but we've been noticing more and more convergence between games and other media for both entertainment and enterprise users. I'm super excited to discuss the topic of metaverse and non-game usages of video game technology today.
So let me kind of kick it off with this morning. I actually had another session that I had, which was about NFT space essentially, and doing this discussion, which as it gets heated because there's a lot of camps in regards to this. The one thing that became really clear is that you have like enormous enthusiasm on one side, like, oh my god, this is amazing, pure freedom, like everything. Who needs rules anymore? We'll replace money, like utopias around the corner. And then on the other hand, right, like we have traditional game developers, we have a lot of, concerns, everything is a scam, and like an enormous kind of backlash towards everything, especially in this case, we talk about NFT space, but metaverse is sort of related to that, right? Like it is sort of like, I think the channel that has really kind of led to this enthusiasm bubbling up as well, right? Like you see like Mark Zuckerberg coming on stage and being very happy, but then people are kind of like, well, we don't really want that guy to be, deciding our future, right? And you've got like, Metaverse, that term very successfully pushed by, the Unreal Engine and by those guys at Epic Games, and we're happy with this, right? But at the same time, people are like, well, it's not going to be that easy. Let's, the Unreal Engine is great, but it doesn't magically make everything happen. So why is there this huge divide, between this enthusiasm and like terror, if you want to call it that? Like, how is that so big? Like, what happened? Like, we blinked and suddenly this was like a thing. Like, what do you guys think? Like, what made that so wide?
So I think part of it is just it's like a new thing. It's like I think a lot of people refer to like the next step in terms of the internet's evolution, right? So when the internet first came up, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, no, it's a cool thing. Like nerds and geeks kind of use it to message and like share files with each other. Then suddenly, like literally everyone's on it 24/7, right? Like everyone and their grandma has a smartphone that they're using to browse the internet right now. And I think the metaverse is kind of in that, or the idea of the metaverse is kind of in that place right now where it's still it's starting to hit the mainstream, but still the bulk of the people don't know what's happening on it. And just like with crypto and NFTs, there's obviously there are scams, and then there are the people genuinely trying to do something, I don't know, that contributes to society with it. And I think until the point where it becomes mature enough where more people understand what it really is, it'll still be kind of these very extreme camps and points of view.
Travel and exploration started with, really curious people who wanted to know the other side. Right? There were, I think, that could be compared with the core or pure gamers, as what we call it. People who are in the games for pure entertainment, for the purity of it, as people see it now. But it really just took off when money started coming in, with the monarchs funding it, and people really being able to travel and interact with the other continents and the countries more frequently. And I think metaverse will take time for us to get there as well. We're just feeling it this way, in my opinion, because we're at the starting stage where those who have the money are able to pave the ways, and we're not just really benefiting or seeing the other side yet from it. We're only seeing the big corporations who are kind of dominating the metaverse space, and it makes us feel concerned, right? It's people like Zuckerberg gonna lead the new generations. That's concerns that people have about this new space.
Like, thank you for talking about sort of like where you guys are seeing the metaverse gaps coming from. And one thing that that got me thinking about this is, this saying where like when the technology looks sufficiently advanced, it kind of looks like magic, right? Like it's just so different from anything that came before it. And it got me thinking, about this like how other people are perceiving this outside of the industry. And there's this term, right? Like the saying of like, if technology is sufficiently advanced, it kind of looks like magic. And it might be a silly comparison, but I think us in the games industry, we have grown up with sort of these, like, what is that rule, like that every 16 months, like processing power doubles, and you're looking at graphics power and like processing power and really like MMOs and hundreds of players and thousands of players playing together. And we are in that wave, like we're riding that, and it really kind of like propels us forward. But from the outside, it might be like somebody like blinks for, let's say, 10 years, right? Like it's not a gamer, and suddenly like you're looking at like the Unreal Engine UE5, and it's just like, what happened? Like this is crazy, and really struggling to understand it. And so there's comfort maybe in, let's call it a label. That's a bit unfair, right? Like, but there's kind of like assigning some kind of tag to it and being like, okay, now I can engage with this. Now, traditional media companies and traditional publishing companies and people that are interested in this, they have a way to get back in there because it's not so intimidating. So to use your analogy, it's kind of like we discovered that there's a new continent, and we all know that there's a lot of interesting stuff over there, but our tastes are kind of soured because the only thing we hear about is like, rich princelings, throwing parties at the beaches over there without actually exploring anything or doing anything else with this giant landmass they've discovered. Is that kind of like how it feels?
They're even from, I'll be honest, even from like people in the game development field, right? Like, some still view it with some cynicism, because if a very pure form of the metaverse, or at least the idea that people have from like, if you're really talking about Ready Player One, is that the metaverse isn't controlled by any one corporation. It is actually, it's like the internet. It's supposed to be free for everyone to access. But just like with the internet, we already have certain countries already having issues with net neutrality and making sure, internet is truly free. That's kind of what's happening in the metaverse right now. In Yaji's analogy, essentially all those big players are already coming in, and they've essentially built their own little kingdoms within the metaverse that aren't truly joined to each other, right? So, the true idea of the metaverse that, even as a gamer myself, I love it. Yeah, cool. I would like to take what I have in one game or one platform, bring it to another, and, just kind of have that freedom to move things around. But that's not really the case right now. It's like you got your stuff in, let's say, one game with one company. You can't really take anything out. They're like, yeah, invest into our ecosystem, our metaverse. Yeah, but it's not really the metaverse of everyone, for everyone, right? So I think that's kind of why, like, from, as, game developers, we see some of this with a cynical eye, but we also understand to truly make it free is a very daunting task. You're going to have to get everyone to agree, you know what, I'm okay with my IPs being just there and anyone can move it between it and do things with it that, I may or may not agree with.
I would also say that, as game developers, I understand the reaction. I mean, I think it's kind of two big parts. Like on one hand, you have people in the games industry that I think it's a cool technology. Cool technology is always going to get us excited. Like, it's just kind of fascinating how there could be this interoperability between so many different systems. That part is intriguing, right? But at the same time, game developers are creatives, are by definition content creators, are, creating something, that kind of entertains ideally, right? And that is kind of put in question when you are actually building a framework that is open to essentially an undefined amount of noise coming from other content creators, right? Like this content comes into your product potentially, and I mean, this is a point that came up this morning. Sean Lee brought it up. It's like at which point does it displace other creative ideas, right? Like if I bring my 5 characters from another game, does it mean that for the game that I take it to, the need is diminished to make unique new characters that are meaningful to that world, right? Like at which point does that interfere? I mean, like Ready Player One, I mean, the idea of having all of these characters in the same universe on one hand is cool, but it also feels kind of like too much sugar, right? Like, and do you drown out maybe other creative ideas? Like, at which point do you encounter that saturation point, right? And you do see it with gamers where there is already some pushback from them. I mean, putting aside all of the NFT pushback, if you go a little bit deeper, you have these mega franchises operating, the Call of Duties and the sequels and everything. But I think the tolerance by players for smaller titles is actually increasing. Like, they are more and more okay with like a 5-person team as long as the idea is really cool. Like they'll play a small pixel art game just because it finally offers like novelty, something new, right? So it makes me wonder, like, what do you guys think? Are we going to see that split just becoming even more extreme? Where it's like on one hand, like metaverse integrated mega platform projects, and on the other hand, kind of like rare, totally volatile 10-person team projects that are like 99% forgotten and never seen, and then like sometimes it's like Among Us and a billion people play it. Like, is that the extremes in which these worlds are going to live? Is that what we should strive for as an industry, I guess? What do you guys think?
I think eventually it'd be all those simple games, but in the metaverse. Playing them in the metaverse. Yeah.
Like in Roblox or something?
Actually, yeah, like Roblox and games similar like that use a lot of user-generated content. That's probably going to be kind of where it goes. I think you will still get the more, it sounds weird, but the more Puritan gamers who are like, no, I want a simple experience. It doesn't need to be hooked up to anything, because there are those who are like, hey, if I'm on the metaverse, that means all my actions are being tracked, my data is being stored somewhere, someone's collecting information on me, right? So do you have those players like, nah, I don't want any part of that. I want things to be simple. I want to just play on my own machine by myself, and that's the pure experience. So it will probably diverge, like you said, but there's just going to be more of that type of simplified content on those type of platforms, I think, as well.
What do you think, Yaji?
That's a really tough question. It's more like crystal ball, right? Like where would metaverse go? But from what I've been seeing, like Richard said, like where I think the attraction of metaverse is the fact that you're able to shape it in a way that users kind of want it to. So I think that level of any experience or games or space that gives that user that freedom to be able to kind of shape it the way you want. Just like how, like social media really took off with Facebook, because you could make it about you, right? And then Instagram came in, replaced it, and they were bought again by Facebook.
Meta.
The personal aspect of it, I think, is where I have seen the trends moving towards, and you're really seeing it on Metaverse.
So one thing that I sometimes fall back to in my own work on design is kind of like, it sounded like trying to understand player psychology really is about like human psychology, right? And what's interesting is with that talk that Alex had on Video Games Real Talk with Michael Green, right? Where Michael talked about and this goes back to Yaji, what you said earlier, that we're building kind of like this digital content and this digital real estate, and that is kind of like something that if we kind of need, maybe this is like a human need, because we're living in a world where, outside of Elon Musk, apparently space travel is not the new frontier, because it's too expensive. Everything's too damn far away, at least right now, for us to go to space, and no new continents to explore. And it's kind of chafing on humans. We want to explore. We want to go and find stuff. It's kind of built into our genes in some sense. Maybe there's a restlessness that needs to be somehow finding an outlet, right? And everything's kind of gobbled up. And so building something digital, is it buildings? Well, we have enough skyscrapers now. That's kind of Michael's point. He says, build something in the virtual world, and then humans again can do what we've done since the Stone Age, and which is honestly what World of Warcraft is, which is you and your buddies go and forage stuff, in bands and find goodies and bring it back to the tribe, right? Like that is literally how many, Richard, you probably know this, like the Stone Age era or the pre-Stone Age, the Pleistocene is what, like 500,000 years? So we're conditioned to do that. And I find it funny that in games, we want to play Valheim, right? Like Valheim is our, legacy as a species. It's like build stuff, club, the bear, bring the skin home, dress yourself in it. And, I feel that like that plays into some of these dynamics of like rebuilding this kind of digital continent. But what's happening is this is clashing, I think, with another kind of, I guess, human condition, which is our desire to tell and experience stories, which is, I think, very fundamental in games so far, right? Like it's interactive, sure, but it is like, it's stories that we want to tell. And so game developers are storytellers, right? Like that's why there's this kind of stereotype or this kind of joke, like all game developers actually want to be movie directors, right? Like that's not really true, and certainly not anymore, but it is sometimes true. And I think part of that is because there is a sense of like, I have an innate creativity in me and I want to express that story. And now what's happening, I think, with, so many more players, gamers becoming like hundreds of millions of new players joining from Asia to Latin America to everywhere else in the world, in Africa and everything, like it's creating like a subconscious sense of, the like bigger player communities, right? It's kind of like, is that where my story is going to live? Or rather, is there a different need, that has to do with kind of bigger communities and building virtual spaces for these communities to live in? And that is a very different kind of game development that is going to come out of that when you really think about it. I mean, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's the thing, right? No one has really built an experience like that, at least not sustainably. Yeah, you do have things like Roblox, previously you had Second Life, and all the various MMORPGs, but they're still few and far between at that level. I think a lot of these, like Meta and the other companies, they're trying to do that now, but it's still a challenge because you may have all these new players, but they're getting them interested in a virtual world is difficult. If you make it too realistic, then it's just like real life again. It's like, well, why bother going to the virtual world, right? But like you said, if we do some kind of more fantasy experience where it's like Valheim, oh, you're back in a certain era with certain rule sets, again, that might not appeal to everyone again, right? So I think that's where it's there's no, I don't have an answer to this, but it's finding what that genre is that will bridge everyone in. Kind of like with something like a more normal platform, like if you're talking about social media, how did Facebook do it to attract people of all walks of life to join it? Or even YouTube, like everyone can find almost any content they like there. But now, how do you make that a game where anyone from any walk of life can find something that interests them? So I think that's kind of the development challenge that there's going to be for creating a truly metaverse game, and I think that's why it's not easy.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting that you brought up that there's kind of two streams of like human desires that are clashing. One that wants to storytell and one that wants to kind of make it their daily experience and make it about themselves. Have that user interactivity. And you kind of see that in the mixed reality space as well, right? As companies are building it, you see on one hand AR, which is all about you kind of trying to bring your experience into it. And on the other extreme, you have the extreme storytellers who are trying to use VR to do like extreme immersive storytelling.
Like come into my world versus I make your world and enhance it and make it more convenient. That's actually interesting, isn't it?
Exactly.
So more clashes of different interpretations of really what the future will be. It's interesting.
And I mean, I don't think there will be a one size fits all. Like, not every, at least not right now. I don't think everyone wants to go around walking with VR headsets. Anyway, that does sound a bit dystopian.
Yeah, like when you see the cow with the
exactly,
goggles on, it's like, what?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many pop culture movies and stuff that have warned us of that kind of a future, right? Where everyone's just doing that. So yeah, I think Yaji has a good point. It's like, it's more like what people want to bring into it, or if they want to lose themselves in it, or they want to bring it into the real world, right?
Yeah, the one part that is a bit unfortunate, I guess, is that, by having a single term, just like NFT, honestly, or blockchain or something, it's kind of like, just imagine for a moment, like if it didn't have those terms, then all that would be going on is like a lot of interesting technology kind of coming up. And, you mentioned AR, that's interesting, like processing power makes it easier. VR is happening, immersion happens, right? Like Unreal Engine, Unity Engine, these kind of things are all on the move. And, because I think the truth is that a single term kind of undersells really what it's going to be, right? Like just saying the metaverse, it kind of like creates a competition maybe for whoever the person, usually it's like, some tech bro is going to figure it out. Like he's going to like metaverse everything. But the truth is probably it's going to just all kind of like evolve and weave together, like in this kind of very complex and very human kind of solution where people will look back at it and be like, that's not a single term. This is just, history moving forward. I mean, that is what I see. But, obviously in our business, and let me ask you about this, guys, obviously, I think there is benefit that we see in terms of running, our teams, that there is a term that gives some kind of comfort to people. Obviously, internally, our devs and us, we may know that this term, there's no comfort in it. It's just technology chaos behind it. But it brings these people, into the conversation where normally they would have been maybe too intimidated to talk to us. Do you guys see that as a valuable piece of it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the double-edged sword that, like any buzzword or coined words that's bring. But I think it will come down to, like you said, like everyone's just kind of have always been trying to explore this digital space in their own ways. And like you said, we see it in the form of AR, we see it in the form of VR, we see it in the form of social medias. And I think that's the way it's meant to be, right? It's just different people have different needs, different groups have different needs. And the diversity and, how different it is from one another is what makes internet currently interesting. And I think that would also make Metaverse interesting down the line. And if someone is telling you very specifically that there's only one way of doing it, like you said, tech bros, then, you should really, view that opinion with a grain of salt, because they're probably trying to sell you something or trying to make kind of take over Metaverse with their interpretation of how it benefits them, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. No, again, like to my earlier analogy, it's kind of like the internet, right? Back, it was and still is a very broad term that covers a lot of things. And similar to Metaverse, there's going to be a lot of utility and applications for it, right? Like everyone is on the internet. People could use it, like us right now, to do this podcast. People could use it to watch a movie. People could use it to work, like most of us as well right now. Share files, social media, watch, it's again, it's kind of that, it's a catch-all, like you said, which helps. It's a catch-all. It brings a lot of people together. But I think right now we don't understand all the things it's catching, or it's an umbrella term for.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, and I wonder if like the other stigma or like the reluctance that people have with Metaverse is because we feel like we were kind of forced into it, and it kind of collided with the pandemic and like us having to be locked in, and that's where it really kicked off, right? So maybe people need a bit more time to kind of walk into Metaverse by choice. They might currently feel like, oh, it's very dystopian because I'm being chased into this world, and you couple that with the property prices rising and people not having the choice to really own a piece of property in the real world. They might feel like, oh, they're chasing us out into the digital world to make it all seem better, right? For the promise of it will all be fine. I wonder if that's partly what's making people kind of view the word in Metaverse or the concept of it in a negative light.
I think, and going back to kind of like when I was listening to Michael Green's talk again, right? Like he kind of makes it clear that these systems, these systems of trade or economy and really any rule set behind, blockchain or any game or game economy, they're too complex at one point to just kind of reset and reload like a traditional video game, right? Like these new systems, including in games, can't just be reset, right? Like there are communities built around, like let's say an MMO. Yeah, in principle, you could kind of like, flush the server clean, reset all the accounts, but people won't stick around. Like this is not the game that it became. Like it's a garden that grew over time, right? And so we can't really understand what is kind of being created on us. And I think this is, a good point like that. And it's not forced by any individual person. It's just kind of like it's evolved towards us. And, time is always marching forward. And I wonder, I'm curious to get your opinion on this part, which is, Fortnite has been around for a couple of years now. These kind of larger MMO titles, starting with World of Warcraft, have been around for a couple of years now. And from it, I think, compared to traditional gamers that came before that, the people, the kids that grew up, their first game was Fortnite or Minecraft or something, right? Like they're much more used to, maybe than we are in the generation before that, they're much more used to, a game that is free, a game that is always online, that, all your friends are in it, they talk about it, there are seasons, you do end up spending money on these games after it has come out, right? Like it kind of updates as you go along. And, in our terms, like maybe it feels that there's more commercialism embedded in those games compared to the purity of what we know about those games. And now that, those quote unquote kids are obviously, maturing, becoming adults, entering obviously their 30s already at, World of Warcraft and everything, maybe there is a much more natural understanding of, of course there are going to be buying or selling transactions in games. Of course, there's communities in games. Of course, there's a lot of back and forth between games that are maybe under the same umbrella, right? Like to them, that maybe is much more normal, whereas for many game developers, that is still something that, again, it doesn't jive with that storytelling or I'm going to give you that unique experience vibe, right? And I mean, what do you guys think? Do you guys see that? Is it a generational thing? Like, don't want to make it about that, but, is that what it is? Like, oh, okay, boomer, is that where we're going?
I think that's partially it. I have definitely noticed, that their perception or their, how they perceive digital goods or, digital assets are very different from how we view it, right? Like I wouldn't spend thousands of dollars on a digital dress that's branded digital dress for my character or an avatar. But like for the, I don't want to call them Gen Zs or the newer generations, I've seen them being a lot more open to the idea, because like for them, like a physical good that's in my hands right now, it's as real, like the digital dress that they have on whatever metaverse space that they're interacting with is as real as what I have on my hands right now. That's maybe that plays into the generation thing as well, like you said, that difference in perception, because like they grew up with it. Like for them, it's as real as how we see physical goods around us.
I just want to add something to that. It's funny because to me, because I know some like scientists and biologists, through my wife, and but they tell me they're like, your industry is great games because it's sustainable, than like oil or whatever, or destroying the environment because, you enacting yourself economically, through computer. Like I can sit here and download things. And aside, of course, technology and, there's some controversy about like Bitcoin and all that in terms of energy. Generally, it is perceived as a very green, quote unquote, green economy. And it is funny because, maybe when you think back, like, let's say a generation and, people were thinking what is going to be like the future? How self-conscious will they be about like, protecting the environment and everything? And the funny thing is that, when you ask, I think some of the new generation, they will say like, we are being conscious of the environment because we are spending digital, because that's where my friends are. But also, I don't go out and, fell a tree, destroy the environment just to extract some materials out of the ground to make, in your example, that dress, right? So to them, it is maybe a way to say, okay, yeah, we are being more conscious of not creating as much plastic, as much waste, just simply because I can sit here, I don't drive anywhere, I don't burn fuel, and I spend time with my friends, I have a good time, and why not interact with digital goods, right? So it's just kind of a very different way of maybe expressing than we thought, right? To be more environmentally conscious, but it kind of is. At least, this is the positive in me speaking. I mean, Richard, what do you think?
Well, to Yea Ji's point, right? Why the digital goods is worth more? Like, why do you buy a fancy dress in real life? You buy it to kind of show off, right? It's like plumage for birds, right? But why it's worth more in a digital space is that it has a greater reach because you're not limited by people you can physically meet. Now it's the audience is much larger. It's like if I have a special skin on my character on Fortnite and I'm playing in the Asia Pacific region, I can show that off to everyone in the Asia Pacific region, not just people I meet in real life. So I think that's where that change in the value of digital goods come in, and that's okay. It's also a very human thing. It's conspicuous consumption, right? And it's just facilitating that in a digital age.
Scarcity of some sort.
And I think, and that's also where while it may still be more environmentally friendly than buying an expensive dress that you wear once and then never wear again, just because that's how fashion works in some cases. It's still to some people it's like the ultimate level of the ultimate evolution of consumerism, where you're not even paying for a physical good anymore, you're paying to the rights to a digital good that is artificially scarce, right? Where they could make 1 million copies and give it out to free to everyone, but no, I'm just gonna make one and put a price tag on it. Yeah.
I mean, the one thing that I find interesting with that is that, on one hand, it is quite dystopian that, we need to entertain ourselves in these virtual spaces, right? But on the other hand, like what's fascinating is, even with blockchain saying like, the trust comes from being distributed, so there isn't a single person, it is still inherently built on trust. And like, Richard, your example of like, those let's say 5,000 limited edition costumes, there's trust that there won't be any more made. Like, everyone agrees this is the price because somewhere someone said to someone, we're only going to make 5,000. And that is trusted, right? And generally, this trust isn't really broken. So, I mean, that says a lot also about our society where, that kind of works, to be honest, because I don't know, like you go back to like the dark ages, I don't think that anyone would believe that like this is worth that much because there's only 5,000 in the world. Trust me, there's only 5,000 gold coins or something, right? Like nobody would buy that, right? But now because the world is maybe so accessible to each other, you can very quickly verify things, and you couldn't really get away with something like it would be on Twitter like right away, right? So that is maybe a positive part of it, right? That this maybe, and then you think about, well, what is the other trust system that has kind of been there already for a long period of time? And that is, I guess, money, right? Like I trust you that this piece of paper is still going to be worth something tomorrow because there's rule of law that says that this piece of paper is worth some kind of currency token when exchanging it, right? So are we seeing some kind of expansion of that, like that where more trust, or more control over that trust somehow enables these much weirder, much more active, more vibrant, like you said, like the peacocking or like, virtual dresses, like, is this sort of the outcome of that? Like things are just kind of like accelerating so fast because of this, then there's some positive aspects in that for sure.
Yeah, I would say part of it is built on that trust, and also it's more the trust in the technology as well, right? Like, previously no one would ever trust anyone on the internet to buy or sell things from them, right? But now literally that, yeah. Like it was just scammers asking for money, like never put in your credit card information. Now I think everyone is buying stuff from the internet, like it's actually like Amazon's killed off a lot of the smaller smaller businesses just because of something like that, right? The convenience and ease, right? And again, the trust that has been built on this technology over time. So yeah, I do agree with your point. It's again people being more used and trusting of this new technology.
What do you think, Yaji? Is it a crazy future we're walking into here, or what?
Yeah, but probably not any less crazy than the generations before and the generations before had.
That's probably true. Let me ask you guys, like, is the answer, like, is it, like when you're looking at sort of Zuckerberg's approach, right? Like his theory seems to be, it's essentially we need escapism, right? It's kind of like the real world sucks and wear these glasses and you will, relive your glory days. Like this kind of dystopian video where there's like this bear that gets discarded and, thrown around and then wears glasses and suddenly becomes happy again. And it's kind of really jarring. And, it reveals one interpretation of where things are going, right? Like, and I don't think it has to go that way. So, I mean, what do you guys think? Like, what is sort of let me ask you this way: which theories you guys think we should certainly discard going forward?
What do you mean?
That we might see out there.
By theories?
Well, that the metaverse is, replacing a depressing reality. Therefore, we need the metaverse. I don't believe in that. I think our world is still, there's a lot of really great things going on. Like, I don't have to wear glasses to escape it. It shouldn't be escapism. I think that should be a theory that should be left behind. I mean, what else do you see where like this, like it shouldn't be that thing? Anything comes to mind? Like, should it replace all money? Let's ask that. Like, should it replace the dollar, the euro? Should everything just be coins? Should everything be paid in Bitcoin? Is that the answer?
No.
Yeah, I mean, like I said at the start, I see it as an expansion of our existing spaces. So I think eliminating one over the other is definitely not the way to go. But there are a lot of potential and possibilities in Metaverse that makes me excited, and the fact that you're able to exist as many personas, you're able to create many versions of your own avatars. If we had 1 million people in the real world, that could be 5 million, 10 million in the Metaverse, right? And as we have seen in the past, like when there is population boom, when humanity grows exponentially, yes, it comes with a lot of problems and downsides, but it also promotes people to be, because like you are limited in some sense. It promotes people to be more creative. It makes people to come up with new technologies and new ways of doing things. So I'm kind of excited to see that. Yeah, and I think to a degree, like us being the developers and the storytellers and the content creators, I think we need to view it with a hint of like optimism and try it out, because you can't really talk about Metaverse or try to control it from the outside. You have to be in there, just like how like Europe initially tried to rule or govern America. I keep going back to that analogy, but govern America from where they are.
What's going on?
Yeah.
Like you want to colonize something?
It didn't work out, right? It was the people who were in America who came up with their own system that was very different from the old system that they had back in Europe. So I think it's the same way. Like if we have this chance or opportunity to really shape how we want the Metaverse to be, and I think with caution, of course, but we have the ability to go in there and really experiment and shape how we want this new space to be like. And I think that's also one of the ways we can get the attention of the system builders of this, what we call the real world, to really pay attention to it, because it is true that we need more regulations and we need more systems, we need more guidance and guidelines in there for it to be a safer space for everyone. And I think the only way we can do that is by having more people in there, because that's when you really catch the attention of people from the real world.
What do you think, Richard?
I think escapism is still a part of it. Just like that. That's the whole point of video games. It shouldn't necessarily be a replacement, but it's still allowing people to experience things they may not in real life ever be able to, right? I think that is still a good, I guess, a noble goal for the Metaverse to do, because let's say for whatever reason you may have someone who is physically impaired. They may not be able to do certain activities, travel to certain parts of the world, but something like the Metaverse gives them the opportunity to do something like that and overcome physical limitations. And I think that is something that the Metaverse should strive for. Not necessarily saying the world is so bad, that's why you need the Metaverse, but it's still doing things that you may not be able to do in the real world because of whatever limitations you may have in your life. So I think that's still something that we should strive for. I think the main thing I would say we should really leave at the door is, well, it's gonna be hard, but it's just kind of the overly consumerist aspects of it, because you can definitely see that as more people, just like with social media and internet usage, as more people spend time on something, the more valuable the data and that can be used to monetize, right? Everyone's used to having an ad blocker on their browsers now for this very reason, right? YouTube literally tries to sell YouTube Premium so that you stop getting ads on their app, right? And that's something I think that we should try to leave at the door for the Metaverse. Obviously, nothing comes free, right? Someone has to host those servers, someone needs to be making that content, but that's kind of a thing that I feel shouldn't belong there.
Monetization methods are outdated, is what you're saying. Like the old way of like serving you like a poster, essentially, like when you're looking at like honestly like Cyberpunk or something, it's a cool sci-fi movie to watch or game to play, but what you're saying is like that really won't be the future. Like humans just will adapt to ignore all of the signs and the neon and the noise and the flare and the glare and be like, enough, like just everything gets discredited, and then suddenly what matters is my neighborhood Instagram, friendly fashion advice person, like TikTok, comes up with, you listen to the influencers, right? Because that's what's happening now. It's like those models have already stopped working. So Richard, you are getting, I guess what you're asking for is like those models are going away, but I guess they're being replaced by things that also are not exactly,
it's still ads,
just without the
it's
problems,
still ads,
right?
just in disguise.
So what about then, for example, what about, the sort of these play to earn stories we hear about, like in the Philippines, you have, farmers that were really hit hard by COVID and everything, and they got to play this game and essentially generate, SLPs, smooth love potion, or breed these little critters called Xyz and then sell them to others. Is that essentially, a fair way to monetize? Is that kind of like the new model that, this is like a metaverse job? Is that more in line of what you're thinking, Richard? Or do you think that also comes with its own challenges than something like that?
I think in that case, it's kind of I guess even like in real life, if you have, some kind, not to say worker union, but like labor protections in place, then it makes sense because it's going to end up being its own labor industry, right? People may treat that as their full-time job, just like even nowadays you get a lot that just streamers, right? That is a full-time job. I'm playing games for a full-time job. I'm being paid for it. But, there are, because it's such a new, vocation or new occupation, there isn't really regulation to protect the individuals, but also prevent the individuals from abusing the systems, right? Because, like even with streaming, there's quite a lot of, at least in recent months, there's a lot of like either tax evasion, money laundering stuff going on with that as well. And, that could potentially be an issue with these types of technologies. So, then you have to start drawing a line. Okay, when is too much regulation a problem versus just enough to protect people? And then who will be in charge of that at that point, right? Because if it's truly decentralized, then it's just, is it a true democracy at that point? Everyone in the system votes for something? Or do you wait for, I don't know, Big Brother government or Big Brother tech company to say, nah, these are the rules now? Yeah.
So you're kind of referring to like DAOs and, governance tokens and things like that, right? These ideas. Yeah. Oh Yea Ji, what do you think when you're looking at sort of like these new, totally digital jobs?
I think again, like people are kind of warping space and time, right? With these new spaces and new opportunities. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But like Richard said, it will have to be followed with some sort of regulations, some sort of a line of control that we have to kind of protect. And, it's a digital space. It's a new space, so we'll need some sort of new guidelines for those.
Yeah, my take on that would also be that it's hard to say where the new average will be because the current examples like Axie and everything, they are still outliers, right? Like they are extreme examples, and it's really hard to say where the balance will fall in, right? Because even with the scholarship model, and there are arguments being made for this that essentially it's kind of like a like it's still somebody else holds the axes and then rents them out, and it's kind of like a landlord model, and there are definitely problems there and protections that are missing, and how does that in the long term really build a sustainable economy in that economy, right? Like how sustainable is it? Because you're looking at like the volatility in the different currencies attached to something like Axie, and it's a question: where will it be in 20 years? Is it going to be predictable, right? I think what's interesting right now is that, and this is again a good thing, there's trust and enthusiasm for these economies, right? Like that is why obviously the currencies have value to begin with. Somebody believes in it and puts into it and keeps valuation in there. But how many of them can there be, and how stable will they be? And is that something, and when can you build essentially your livelihood around that, right? Like, and how protected will it be? Then the question is, okay, who decides that, right? Like, are those the governments? Is it some kind of internet government that gets to do this? Is that driven by, the cats will run it? I think that's what's going to happen, right? At that point, like the pictures of kittens will talk to each other somehow and figure that out. And, and it is all metaverse, right? In terms of different layers of it, I guess, right? Like there's the technology that drives it. There's the economies that are springing up in different places, but it's hard to say how stable they are, what we're looking at, right? And I think that makes it hard when people come to us and they're like, hey, we want something like this and like that. And it's kind of like, well, that already exists, but we don't know how much of an outlier that is, because there may have been 20, 30 other games that have tried to tap into the same kind of patterns, of building this kind of game experience and tapping into this kind of NFT model, or just even without NFTs, just economy of experience, and it may or may not work, right? Like, so it's hard, I think, for us as developers to really predict as well where everything is going to land. But I mean, that's also, I guess, part of the fun of it, right? Like the unknown of it, so we definitely are feeling that. I mean, how do you guys see that? Like the horizon has become very kind of not turbulent, but just kind of like there's all kinds of weird stuff on it. Like it's like pixelated, it's like I don't know, like apes over here and Unreal Engine over there. I don't know, but it's I mean, that part keeps it really exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's exciting, and I can also see why people are like fearful of it, because like you were talking about play to earn, and that's essentially using games as your means of livelihood, right? And that sort of audience innately has to be very different from people who play games as a hobby, right? And I think what the developers are fearful of is like, oh, like we're afraid that people will come into our game and start ruining the communities and the sense of culture that we have built here, because they're just trying to maximize the not the experience but the money out of it, right? And that in turn could lead to people kind of abusing the system. And that's not what the design was meant for. So maybe we'll start seeing, just like how people paint for work and paint for hobby, and those two are two different streams that they have. We might even start seeing games that are developed specifically for play to earn, economy, work, livelihood, versus games that are more meant for people who want to come in and kind of experience the culture that the designers had in mind when they were building this system or experience or storytelling when they built the game.
Yeah. I mean, that's the weird part, isn't it? It lives on a spectrum between totally storytelling game over here, like, let's say The Last of Us or something, like very, like almost like the writer's vision, with its own controversies, extreme over here. And then on the other end is like, I don't know, Mark Zuckerberg's VR work platform or something, where like Facebook for Work or something. And it's all on the spectrum, right? And I think that is the part why there are all these tensions, because it's really not clear where is the new balance going to be. And I think that disorientating, frustrating feeling is what a lot of developers are feeling, because it's just not a good answer. Some just simply categorically say all the technology of this bucket, we don't touch it, right? I don't think we're doing that, but at the same time, we definitely have to be careful, because it's very disorientating with so many kind of pitfalls that can be out there, so many exploits. I mean, Richard, what do you think?
So yeah, I mean, going into just kind of how we'll shape the game development, I think that split will be real. Not like, to be honest, like I go to play games for escapism, right? Like I don't want to make it a job. I don't want it to remind me of work, even though I work in the games industry. So it's kind of funny, but it should be something that, at least for me, it's something that takes my mind off of it, right? And it is escapism to a certain extent, and it's a fair point, right? Like, there will be people that want to do it as a job, right? Since the start of MMORPGs, people have been gold mining and selling their accounts or selling their items on parallel markets anyway. This is just more or less legitimizing it in a certain way, making it, okay, your efforts are doing, are translating into monetary benefits. And hey, look, it's actually within the rules. It's not against the terms of service for this game. So I think that's a fair evolution, and it is just the emergence of more digital economies.
I agree, and I think the companies or the studios have to be mindful of the original audiences that they built the games for, because I think that's where a lot of the negativity or the conflicts come in, right? You design the game for experience. You don't just suddenly patch an NFT on top and try to attract the play to earn players. It's never going to work. The two communities will always have a clash. It's not going to be satisfying experience for neither of them, right? So
I think when you're looking at existing games and patching NFTs, and this is almost doomed to fail. I think you have to go all in, and just you committed to that is what you're doing. Or don't do it at all, right? Like, it doesn't seem right now that there's really a good middle ground. Although I can come up with scenarios where certainly I think an easier way to compensate somebody in a game is valuable. Like an example would be like, Richard brings up World of Warcraft or, EVE Online or something where you have, communities and that there are like clan leaders, corporation leaders in those games that are spending like the majority of the time, well, just being community organizers, right? Like leading, the people. They don't have time for mining or making money in the game, right? Like they have to spend time just like with, well, the human drama that comes with running maybe 100-person clan or 500 or 1,000-person virtual corporation in these games. And, the funny thing is that, maybe a lot of them are spending an enormous amount of hours in this game. And for them, it's both a job to some degree that they don't get paid for, as well as obviously it's a hobby. And they love doing it. But I think there is a sort of looking at those communities, I've noticed there's got a problem with like burnout and problems like this, for that leadership, which you think about it, like leading teams is the job that in the real world you get paid the most money for. Whereas in these virtual worlds, they're doing the same thing, dealing with all of the human drama, all the emotions, but it's in a virtual game. And so they're getting no compensation for it. Like they have no jobs, right? And there's like jokes being made by those leaders. Maybe they should get like a Patreon account so somebody can pay them, right? Which is ironic because in the game, that clan or corporation may be rich in billions or trillions and have gold and property and, have real power and influence, but they can't pay their people. They're in real life. They live of pizzas and a block of cheese. It's a bit ridiculous, right? Like, so is there a way to say, there is fairness to say somehow can, those 500 members somehow muster their economic might they do it in the game and translate some of that over to just compensate their leadership, their community managers with that economic, power? Or do they really have to go and take it out of their wallet or out of the day job and then set up a Patreon account, which feels a bit like a contradiction, right? Like that, it clashes, right? Like it creates a dissonance, I think, when you're in that community for having to do that, where like I have billions in the game, gold or ISK or whatever it might be, but I still have to go over here and then use PayPal for people in the game, right? So is there a way to connect that dot? I think there will be a big argument to be made about that eventually being solved, right? You guys see what I mean? Like, does that feel strange? I mean, what do you guys see?
Making it worth it.
Yeah, I mean, you're investing time. Like, is time worth something if you're doing it for other people, especially as a human being?
Yeah, I think that's a question that that's like $1 million question, right? If you solve it, you kind of are unlocking the key to something, like key to the major conflicts that we're seeing in this metaverse space right now, really. But I think someone will eventually figure it out. Like the ads, if you remember the first generation ads, they were very clunky. They were very like out there and abrupt, and they were very unsophisticated. But if you look at ads right now, like half the time you don't even realize it's an ad, right? It's kind of baked into the experience, baked into the content. So maybe someone will solve that question down the line in the metaverse.
Yeah, that's very true. So as we're coming on our hour here, 60-minute mark, any closing statements from you guys? Kind of look into the crystal ball of the future, what the metaverse will be. I mean, my take will be that there will be the point, just like with other technologies, where that term will just kind of be replaced by other things, right? And we'll look back and it'll just be like cross-media or something, right? Like something has passed and we'll just have gotten used to it. And new exciting technologies and games and platforms will have emerged from it. And what is your guys' take on it?
From my side, I think, just user acceptance will go up as, this sounds terrible, but as the older generation start being, as more of the younger generation become the consumers, right? Like, to a certain extent, some of these technologies aren't targeted anymore to the older generation. That's just it, right? It is a new, it's a new tool, it's a new technology, it's a new mindset. And I think for those that have, like you said, grown up with things like Fortnite or this type of social gaming, it's just the natural next step.
Agreed. Yeah, I think exposure is everything. The more people get exposed to it, they will start accepting and start developing and shaping the metaverse in the way they want to see it as they grow up. And I think just like how smartphones kind of did that switch for us on the internet side of things, like with the social media and the influencer era, I think what companies like Niantic or Microsoft or Sony are pushing with their hardware technologies, I think once that catches up and allows people to have more frequent and less inconvenient or clunky way of connecting to the metaverse or whatever the term ends up being down the line, I think we will start really seeing it take off. But it will take a while, I think, until that convenience factor is really there.
Agreed. So, well, with that, thank you guys and thank our audience for coming onto the special edition of VGRT. And thanks also for David Burton, who is behind the curtain here in a very horrible time zone for him. You know, it's for us, it's 6 p.m. for him, some ungodly hour. We don't know, but we thank you for coming and making this happening for us as well. So thank you, everyone. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and most importantly, discuss with us down there. We were active in responding to that. So thank you and see you guys soon.